This conference will now be recorded.
Yes, we can see it, and it is recording now, and so I'll go ahead and mute everybody.
Okay.
Whoops. Okay, apparently if I hang on 1 second, I need to take you off of it, Shimon. Okay, we should be able to hear you now.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you everybody for joining us. I'm really excited for this demonstration. My name is Shimon Rothschild, and this is a demonstration on how to better defend against this person, the cyber attacker. How do we defend against them? Well, we have to think like them. And this is not easy for us because the cyber attacker is what's called an evil actor. To defeat the cyber attacker, we must do three things. We must, one, think like a hacker, two, document that behavior, and three, describe what our desired outcome should be. And that's what this demonstration is about. We are reviewing writing and diagramming threat cases. Threat cases have some similarities to use cases, but they are fundamentally different. Like use cases, disaster planning and recovery has some similarities. Okay, I want to mention this, by the way, as we're talking about disaster planning, that every year there's a major insurance company that surveys business leaders about what they expect will be the top threat this year. This year, for the first time, number one, with nearly 50% of the respondents answered that the number one threat was the cyber threat. This is new. This is the first time it's been that high. And it's especially challenging because the language of the cyber world and cyber threats is different from traditional disaster reporting. During the demonstration, we are decomposing this diagram into parts that are easy to understand. Let me show you what I mean really quickly. This is a very quick overview of what we were looking at. Number one, there is a single point of entry. Jump to number four. Those are endpoints. Important to remember, endpoints are testable. Number two, the rectangles. These are called states, and they are like the analogy of a room, or in an organization, this might be the crown jewel. Number three is called a gate or a test condition. And the last thing is five, that's a flow. Those are like water in a pipe, connecting states and gates. Information is passed between the states in the flow as water travels through a pipe. And that's what there is in a diagram. Let's go next. Okay, my brief introduction. After 40 years as a software developer, I returned to university for a PhD in computer science. My university research included finding root causes for why software projects fail. I saw more than one of those in my career. By and large, they are not coding or design problems that caused the failures, but miscommunication. In my role as the software leader, I trained business analysts, software architects, and programmers to better describe software specifications. What we are demonstrating here are the results of fieldwork and my recent research. The demonstration comprises of 4 components. The first is a review of writing good use case. The format is applicable to the misuse case as well. The second is demonstrating how to think like a cyber attacker. The third is diagramming. It is a simplified format that allows easier understanding. Some people may have learned UML diagramming. This is based on it, but this is a much more simple implementation. The last is definition of this types of cyber attackers. I want to mention, I don't know if you have available for download the quick notes of what I'm talking about. If you don't, it's available on my website, and it will be after this demonstration. It's www.rothschild.com, downloads threat_case_note PDF. I invite you to download it and use it. Okay. Starting with writing a general use case. Writing better use case necessitates following a structure. The misuse case follows the structure or template. The middle one, sky, is just a guideline. It's not a template. Given and noun are writing templates that we follow, and you'll see examples of them in a few minutes. Okay. The next is thinking like a cyber attacker. This is accelerated by using existing use cases. A common error that I see is attempting to shoehorn an evil actor and their behavior into a normal business flow. I like to use the analogy that you see at the bottom. Both take money. A bank robber, though, is not a bank customer. We can't use a bank customer use case in describing a bank robber's workflow. That's point 1 there on the right. What we can do is replace the bank customer with the bank robber at the beginning of the use case. It's now a misuse case, and start to walk through the flow. Very quickly, the flow changes, but it's the starting point that we need to start thinking like the threat actor. And the last thing that we can do to get from use case to misuse is take from other domains. We can use their analogies to make a point, and we can also apply directly some of the things they do in our own experience is in threat modeling. Next. The third thing that we're going to talk about is diagramming. The written use case is sufficient in simple scenarios, but a diagram might be better because it either decomposes the misuse case, or it can also chain a few use cases together. The advantage of the diagram is that it more explicitly identifies the weak links in the misuse case. The pattern that we use is state, decision, state, decision. Again, I repeat that it's a little bit different than how anyone who has learned UML. This is a format that we're very consistently using. The last thing that we're going to talk about specifically is the cyber threat. The cyber threat is distinct from other types of disasters. Each one of these has a different response, depending upon the cyber target in the organization and the sophistication of the attacker. Different mitigation strategies for each of them may be needed. Okay, now let's start getting down into the nuts and bolts. The first thing I talk about is the template, given, when, then. In writing a use case, we follow this template. Given is the starting point. When is an activity, and the expected outcome, good or bad, is then. Given, when, then, as this template is powerful because it's testable. Every given is a stated input. Every then is the expected output. You run a test and you measure your output against what you expected. That's why this is so powerful. In testing, when the actual then is not the same as the expected then the test failed and there's something wrong with the implementation. At the bottom here, I have an example of a given, when, then statement. Given, an evil actor downloads files. When the system sounds the alarm, then staff starts mitigation action. It's very clear. Given, there's an action and a result. Something here not documented, however, is time. And time is critical in cybersecurity. They don't talk about it enough because I may sound an alarm, but it may be too late. So I may have fulfilled this requirement in spirit, but in fact, I didn't. And that's an important consideration as we go through all of these. Time is one of the parameters that we don't give enough credit to. Okay, let me see. All right. More about this given, when, then. The given, when, then formula or template is actually quite common in software development. It's used for testing. It is used in what's called test-driven software development. And sometimes it's also used in agile development. And in the agile world, it's sometimes called acceptance criteria. Given is a business requirement. When is an activity. And then is the outcome that is testable. For example, on this one here, if I can log into a new piece of hardware, talking about number one, the simple approach to explain a problem and solution. If I can log into if I can log into a new piece of hardware using the default password, then the test failed. If the test fails, that means I do not meet PCI DSS standards. PCI DSS standards, by the way, is a credit card consortium. It's several of the banks, and they got together saying if you're going to manage and handle credit card data, these are the rules to protect the data. Every company has to be PCI DSS compliant who handles a credit card, or they should be. Notice that the word password is in red. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later about why I singled that one out for special attention. On this second example, given an employee swipes tag and opens a secure door, when the evil actor piggybacks on the open door, then notice I don't have a solution. It's an open issue. One of the powerful things about this is we don't forget about our open issues. We don't have to know everything, but we have to know that we have to be able to ask. Okay. The next thing I'm going to talk about here is this concept of the sky, surf, and undersea. This idea was introduced over 20 years ago as use case levels. Functionally, a single sky level requirement can have several sea level use cases. As we saw in the previous slide on the PCI, sky level requirement, there are several here. Let's go back there for a minute. Oh, here, okay. PCI DSS is about a 42-page manual of what to do. So given that you want to meet the requirements, each one of those dozen or more PCI DSS requirements has a number of sea level requirements. Back to this one. So as we're saying, one sky can have several sea levels, and below sea level that's implementation, and a sea level can have several below sea level implementations. Okay, next. Okay, this is a little bit more of the detail of how it's done in the software development world so that you get a better feel for it. If you notice at the bottom there, I tell you the business rule. This is the summary. Meet PCI DSS compliance for certification. These are usually business goals or mandated regulations. Here's an example that I came across a couple of years ago. Banks must comply with KYC, know your customer. It's a standard due diligence process for preventing financial crime. Each financial institution can develop their own KYC program, but the program has to comply with the laws governed by the AML. I love all these acronyms. That's part of the problem why it's so difficult to do cybersecurity. And AML is Anti-Money Laundering Framework. And of course, each country has its own. The idea is we start with the ALM, we decompose it to the KYC, and we bring it down lower and lower until eventually we get to the sub-function. Key point is user goals. Those are testable. These are the most common. These are the ones where we do the user protect, for example here, protect stored cardholder data. That's an implementation. That is an implementation of what we saw previously, meet PCI DSS compliance. Now, here is an implementation detail. Purge unnecessary stored data quarterly. Using an analogy, this is the kind of thing that gets tested by the software programmer in their code. It's called unit tests. An example of this would be that after a specific time, the data gets deleted from the database. Another example of something that I worked on this, a second subfunction requirement would have been when displaying customer information to an employee, display only the last 4 digits of the credit cards on file. Notice the last 4 digits and purge unnecessary data are not at the user goal. Those are really subfunctions, and most of the time, those are what we call implementation details. Next. The last thing I want to talk about is the noun, verb, noun. Another thing that comes from software development, that the noun, verb, noun is used actor, action, actor formula. And each one of the given, when, and then statements can be written in that kind of structure. As you can see down below, evil actor scans files. In a couple of slides, I'm going to be giving you an opportunity to write one of these, and you get a feel for how it works. The advantage of doing it this way is that when everybody's doing it the same way, it becomes a lot easier to read. We know what to look for. If I know that those of us who've had to read these big documents, one, we tend not to read them, and two, when we tend to read them, we don't really know what's critical. This kind of like takes the essence out of it, so we know exactly what we have to look for. Next. Okay, the formula for the noun, verb, noun is one, there's an actor. Verb is usually an action that the actor is doing, and the noun three is the same actor or a different actor who's responding to that action. Here's some examples. A good actor unlocks a door. An evil actor sends an email. Software firewall quarantines outbound message. It's pretty clear what these things are happening. Okay. So next. Okay, this is the summary of what we talked about so far. Just take a moment to look at it, and then I'll talk about it a little bit. Okay. In its most atomic structure, we have given followed by a noun, verb, noun. Then we have when followed by a noun, verb, noun. And we have a then followed by a noun, verb, noun. This is the format of a misuse case. The challenge in all of this is keeping the scope, as we talked about a little bit about the summary, subfunction, and user goal. It's kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Too hard, too soft, and just right. And unfortunately, it's not really clear where to delineate the two. It's kind of like a decision based by a group or based by somebody who says so. Okay, now I'm going to let you try something on your own. Take a moment to read that paragraph and see if you can identify a given when, then in that paragraph. I'll give you a minute. Okay, let me show you one answer. There is no right answer. This just happens to be, you can see how I pulled it out. From the paragraph, I find a given, when, then. Given, when, then. Now, there's an interesting comparison between this and it might look familiar to you, the reading comprehension tests on a GRE or an LSAT. I don't know if this template is applicable, but if someone tries it, I would like to know. And as you can, I believe, and most do, that reading the given, when, then is easier to find the information than reading it in the paragraph below. Okay, going on to the next one. From use to misuse. I know I'm moving kind of fast through this, But when you get it, whenever you can download that paper, you'll be able to, it will help you to recall what I'm saying here. And you'll see the paper and you'll say, it really is this simple. It really, really is. Okay. The first section that I covered was the generics of how to write a use case. Now we're going to talk about going from a use case to a misuse case. The first one, not alternate, is what not to do. The second and third are things that you should try. All right. Why not an alternative or an exception? Okay. First, let's define what an alternative means, or an exception. If you look at the flowchart down below, you see that there is a test, the diamond in the middle between files downloaded and files scanned. That's a test or a gate. There's two outcomes, yes or no. Almost all of them are just two-way, Boolean. Okay. There's the normal flow and there's the alternative flow. Normal flow is what you expect most of the time to happen. Alternative are things that can happen and you need to deal with them. Exception, which I'm only going to talk about this one instance, are things that should never happen, but just in case they do. How do I manage it? Most of the time in the software world, we have something like it throws up a generic message saying you've seen this is error number whatever, contact support. That's the common one. The one you don't want to have is the old-fashioned blue screen of death like I had in Microsoft. That would be called an unhandled exception. Okay. That being said, from now on we talk about only about the alternative flows. Now the question I ask is, why not do an evil actor as an alternate flow? And let me give you an answer why not. One of the problems is usability. Because the flows are different, they very quickly diverge and make it very difficult to understand the flow. Another reason is testability, that they're separate tests. When we integrate them together, it becomes a lot harder to test them. Okay. Let me see something here now. Okay. We have one benefit, before I move on to the next slide, that we have one benefit that the cyber threat actor doesn't have. We know where the gates are. And because we know where the gates are, we can control the behavior. Why that's important is because the evil actors act at the gates. Their whole objective is to circumvent and fool the gates so that they can traverse the path that they want. So if they don't know about the alarm, that gives us a special advantage. This is an example of what not to do. There should never be a test that asks, is this a cyber attack? It adds complexity, and the flows are fundamentally different. Just like the bank robber is not a bank customer, the flows are fundamentally different. I mean, there's a recent example I came across where I got locked out of my bank logging in because of too many login attempts. Now, realistically, my entering the username and password several times is fundamentally different than how a cyber criminal tries to hack into an account. There are patterns and things that they could have used to differentiate between me and a real hacker, but they just chose not to. In my opinion, that is a very bad user experience. It's another reason why we shouldn't superimpose hackers and threat actors on normal flow. Okay. Well, is that right? Yeah, okay. The better way of doing it is to take your use case, just replace actor with evil actor and begin walking through it. Thinking, okay, as the evil actor, I got into the thing. Now I can go and take all these things that I shouldn't be getting access to. And now we start to think about what should we be doing to defend these things. For example, when I got locked out of the system from my bank, I type maybe 1 character a second, and after several times, it just said, okay, you're going to have to call in. The evil actor doesn't manually type 1 character a second. They have automated systems that do this. They have lists of common passwords. They have lists of passwords that I've used in the past that have been hijacked from other websites. So they have a whole different set of tools than my fumbling around on the keyboard. They could look and see that passwords being tested, are those the same ones on the list that every single person can buy for a couple of dollars on the dark web? If so, then they can assume it's a hacker. Again, it's kind of common sense, user experience, but I think you get it. So concept being, just take your use case, replace it with an evil actor at the beginning, and start walking through it, because very quickly they start to behave differently. And that's where you get to find out what other mitigation strategies you need. You're not going to find mitigation strategies on your use case because they're good guys. Okay, here's an example of a better use case. Notice I replace actor with evil actor. Key point here I want to share with you that in this one, before any mitigation strategy, the user logs in, they're valid, true, they got access to the permission list, they can now do everything that the real user could have done. Bad news. I don't know what to do, but I know I need to ask somebody. And that's how we escalate the problems. Now, one of the interesting things here is that there are several different kinds of mitigation strategies, either before entering that state, the permission list state, or after exiting that state. I don't have to know every single one of those mitigation strategies. I can ask somebody who's an expert at it. And that's the purpose of the diagramming. I can go say, tell me, what are our options here? How much do they cost? Next. Okay, this one is very important, and it's probably hard because it's not done yet a lot. It's to take the strategies from other domains. As I said earlier, thinking like a cyber criminal is difficult. Most of us don't think that way. And that's part of our problem. We'll talk about that later, about having to do with social engineering. We just don't think evil. But there are domains where they do think, quote, evil. Criminal investigations, sports, and natural disasters. Okay, in simple, criminal investigation, motive, means, and opportunity. At each one of the different states, that's the rectangles, you can ask, who has motive for being here? Evil actors. What evil actor has motive for being here? How might they get there? And how can they get there? Let me give you an example of something I came across interesting on opportunity, because opportunity is really, it's not something that we would normally think of. This is something I learned from the Dallas FBI office. They reported this. There was an organization that was offering funds to startups. Startups pitched their proposals, eventually providing proprietary and secret information in an effort to acquire funding. The organization was a hoax. They shut down, never funding a single startup, and we assume that they are using the proprietary and secret information they gained, that they collected, to build their own startups. Opportunity, startups need money. How do I get money? Tell them I'll give them money, just give me your information. And they walked away. So it takes a lot of creativity. Most of us wouldn't think of that. And that, we'll come to that in a few minutes, what the options are for that. Sport defense strategy. As I say, in a number of instances, having analogies helps us to explain what it is we're trying to accomplish, because the language of cybersecurity can be at times really difficult to understand. So here's an example from sports. NFL football, they have separate offense and defense playbooks. The analogy, use case versus misuse case. Another one, practice to become better at real world situations. Most of us don't practice cybersecurity response enough, if at all. They talk about tabletop exercises. I'm laughing now because you imagine if football players did tabletop exercises. I suppose it would result in less injury, but I don't know how useful it would be in the real world. A third thing is give up yards, but not points. Insignificant compromises to learn about the opponent. This one, I want to take a moment to mention that I have heard of that one in cybersecurity as a way to watch the behavior of cyber attackers. But the one case that I know of was, it was a nation state that had hacked, and they wanted to be able to attribute the attack to that country. So they needed to know what they were looking for. Other than that, I don't know that anybody has ever tried using giving up yards but not points in cybersecurity. It's an interesting one, but I think that it requires a special skill. The last one, natural disaster, that some planning can be applied from natural disasters. But just like use cases, they very quickly diverge. A cyber attack on a power grid has some similarities to the 2021 Texas power crisis, but not enough to say that we can just apply lessons learned. The interesting thing, however, though, is we can use it as a good starting point. Just like we can use a use case, we could use the Texas power crisis as a starting point. Say, instead of weather, we could say it's a cyber threat and move from there. This last one, Goi Hamaguchi, I practiced that, believe me, I can't do it, is a Japanese children's story I actually came across it while researching for this demonstration. I like the story and understand how it applies to natural disasters, but I'm not convinced that it has implication for security. If you get an opportunity and you don't know the story, I invite you to read it. And if you think that it applies to cybersecurity, I'd like to know how. Okay. Summary. It's one of the few things I think that is most important that we understand. Misuse flows are not appended to use cases. We have to make our own unhappy flows. They're always initiated by an evil actor. And if there's something you don't know, document it. And the other real world domains, if you know something in some other domain and you can apply it, it helps make it easier for people to understand cybersecurity in context. And again, if it's the number one worry about these people, once we get everyone to understand it, then we can start getting mitigation strategies. I've learned a saying, people will buy what they think they need, they won't buy what they don't understand. I don't know if it's still true today, but I do believe it. Okay, just for a minute for you to think about it. When introducing misuse cases, the problem sometimes is resistance from an organization. Are there analogies in your organization that can be applied? Use analogy to overcome opposition for creating misuse cases. I'm going to give you just one example of something I thought about. An analogy to the porter who recognizes every resident. What if a system recognized every authorized user typing pattern? Just like the analogy of the porter who looks at the person, says, okay, instantly knows who they are, opens the door, doesn't ask for ID. I recently saw a demonstration of a system that learns employee typing patterns. Is it applicable for cybersecurity? Maybe, I don't know. But because the language of the cyber world and cyber threat is different from general discussions, analogies may be a better way of understanding. Okay, this is the third of the 4 components. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. Diagramming is based on the template given when then. It is not necessary for cyber threat. Diagramming is not necessary for cyber threat identification, but it does demonstrate a more complete flow and is easier for requesting input from others. Okay. As we go through this, I'm going to point out again that hackers hack at the gates. That's something that's important because that's also the same places where you're going to want to look at your mitigation strategies. Now, where do you get ideas for your threat cases? Use cases we talked about, but that's not enough. Sometimes use cases aren't even available. So start with recent events. Some things are not intuitive. For example, number 3, they're looking for interactions. The Russians were looking for interactions with foreign governments. And some things are very obvious, like 4, ransomware. This list came from, let me see, from some recent cybersecurity bulletins that I get. So the idea being is that we have to read about what's happening to other people. And here's another list. This is general from the press. Ransomware, not a surprise. That was really big concern about businesses in that insurance company survey. Key point here is that we can learn from what is happening to other companies. Ransomware is a big deal, and it should be. The cost for a cyber attacker to penetrate a ransomware attack is really, really low, free. And profit margin is high, and the chance of getting caught is low. How easy is it to start a ransomware attack? Anyone who can follow directions on a YouTube video can launch a ransomware attack. Go to youtube.com and search code ransomware, and you will find videos how to do it, including where to download the code. And you too can be a cyber threat. It's that, yeah, it really is. Unfortunately, it is that easy. The last thing I want to talk about here is identity protection. And I mentioned this one because stolen data can have a very long shelf life. Like I say in number 2, it may be encrypted, but in the future, it will be decrypted. And the question is, will it still be embarrassing, disruptive, or will it already be stale and expired? We've seen that. Some things have a life of over 100 years. Some things have a life of a few seconds. Again, we're talking again about time. Time is one of those things we don't talk about enough in cybersecurity. Next. Okay, take a moment, please, to read this because we're going to spend some time going over this, turning this statement into a diagram.
Hey, just give you a quick warning. You've got about 8 minutes left.
Okay, I'll move faster. Okay. So we start with the given, when, then. We take this and break it down to the given, when, then. Then we start with the diagram. Given, when, then. Evil actor accesses data. There's an alarm. And I said we start with the first step. Open issue, don't hide it. Next. Okay, we've talked about this already. The file, our hacker now has the file. Is it encrypted? Can they decrypt it? If they cannot decrypt it, they will in the future. Now, the evil actor, if they can see the data, what can they do with it? As you see at the bottom, they can blackmail, they can steal, and they can destroy. What else can they do with the information? We put each one of those in as states, and each one of those as decision points, and then we can start to say, okay, how are we going to defend against this? Last thing is, how is the intrusion going to be detected? And putting it all together, this is what we have. Each one of the diamonds represents a gate. Therefore, each one of those has a question. What can we do about this? What needs to be here? Many of the states, like files downloaded, have a question. Can we air gap it? And key point, every gate, the diamond, is an opportunity to stop the evil actor. That's what they try to circumvent. I once wrote some code where I simply could take and skip over the entire testing, and it went straight as though there was no test whatsoever. It went straight to where it wanted to go. It's not difficult. Activity diagram, I'm mentioning this only for completeness, is orthogonal view of the state transition diagram. All right, we're running out of time, so I'm going to move a little faster. Mitigation strategies. As I said, every gate is an opportunity to introduce mitigation strategy. The states are the crown jewels. If they can get in, but they can't get out, that's okay. One of the things you need to think about in any business is the cost, annual loss expectancy, and from that you decide how much you want to spend on defending the state. Cyber threat, okay. This is specific now. Social engineering. Social engineering is different from the remaining three because social engineering is done by all the other three. Social engineering is the psychological manipulation of people. A high percent of cyber attacks rely on social engineering. 95% of all attacks incorporate social engineering. What can you do about that? This is what it does. It takes advantage of the human trust and kindness. There are tools to prevent users from making mistakes and training to remind users of the risks and safe practices. This is low cost, high value. This is one of the things that everybody should be doing. One doesn't need a professional cybersecurity expert for this. Combine user training and low intrusion tools to mitigate the risks. Again, 95% of all attacks incorporating this, it's an easy first step. Script kiddies. This is what we talk about downloading something from the YouTube. It's a nuisance, but a real threat. Anybody can do it, and it's really easy. Fortunately, there are simple tools to defend against it. You don't need a non-cyber professional to implement some of these tools. Professional criminals. This might include insider assistance. This requires monitoring and participation in national organizations for the awareness of threats. Like I indicated earlier, where some of my sources of what the threats are, I get them from the national organizations like the FBI, like InfraGard. Cyber professionals may be necessary. The last one, nation state terrorism. This is the critical infrastructure defined by the CISA, and you have to follow their guidelines. It's now becoming the law. The last thing is there's something called bonus slide, the zero trust architecture. This was something that was required as of a year ago. And the concept being is that don't trust anybody on the network. And for this, checking at every gate that they're authorized to pass through becomes not just optional, but essential. Summary. Misuse case, replace the good actor with the evil actor. The structure given when then, noun, verb, noun. Diagramming is based on state, gate, state. The gates are where evil actors can be stopped. States are those things that you are trying to protect. And again, the fact that they can get in, we don't want them to get out. Social engineering and script kiddies are manageable. Professional criminals necessitate professional cyber staff. And that's everything. Thank you. We have, I guess, a couple of minutes for questions. 1 minute or more.
I was going to say we're at about 1 minute, so I would also point out to everybody that if you don't see it, on the bottom right-hand corner of the slide is your contact information. I'm sure you'd love to converse with people about it as we go on as well.
Yes, everyone's welcome to contact me.
Okay, so any quick question before we sign off for today then? Oops, I might have to take everybody off of mute. Let me see, unmute all. Okay, well, thank you very much for all this information. Really, really informative. I know that I appreciate it, and I'm sure that everybody else does. So thank you everybody for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Any questions, you're welcome to contact me. Thank you. Bye, everyone.